Hey everybody, the Wood Pack is back. Anthony and Bob Barker are back here with another build. This time we're going to be making a dog ramp for my mom's dog Benny. And Bob Barker had really mixed emotions about this build because he likes to do stuff for my mom, but he really does not like to share her attention with any other dogs. And this is actually kind of a fun build because it's a really simple construction. It's a true DIY project, something that I think most people would be able to tackle. We're making the frame here out of 2x2 lumber that we just got from our local box store. And for the joinery, for the most part, we're gluing and pocket hole screwing most of it. We're going to be doing just some regular screws on other parts as well. And for this one, I didn't go with my normal approach. Usually I'll kind of do a SketchUp file and plan out the builds pretty well. This one I just kind of was flying by the seat of my pants. Just kind of taking it as I went. But the general idea for this is we got to make it really high because for some reason my mom's bed is 33 inches tall, which kind of blew my mind. I had to remeasure it like 3 times because I didn't believe it was that tall. And then because of that, it has to be relatively long, but we're kind of constricted on space. So it needs to be narrow and not any wider than the width of the bed itself. And then after going through all the options with my mom, I was talking about putting some drawers or extra storage space under the ramp or making it a big cave for her little guy Benny. But she decided she really just wants it very simple. Just a plain ramp, one small little opening with a window, and that's about it. So for here, we're getting the top part of the platform done. We're going to be putting a rail on the outside portion of it just to make it a little reminder so he doesn't jump off. And that's why I had those pieces from the frame come up because that's going to serve as the base for the rail. So here we're just cutting out the squares on the corners. That way this piece of plywood can go flat on it. And this is probably a little bit overkill, but we're using 3/4 inch plywood mainly because that's what I had available and it's going to be nice and sturdy for them. And so I can go ahead and put my test fit on there, and you can see those portions are going to be for the handrails there. And now we're going to be making the ramp part of it. And so for this one, we're just getting the frame pieces and just kind of setting it all out and seeing where the plywood is going to go for the part of the ramp and just marking everything in place so I can figure out the angles that we're going to need for the cut. So I'm just marking those angles straight on to the 2x2 lumber there. And then we're going to take it back over to our miter saw in a minute and just set it to those angles. And we're marking all the different junctions of these pieces of lumber to make sure we have everything is set up how we want it. So here I'm just kind of sneaking up on the cut on this little piece to make sure I have that angle correct. The nice thing with it is almost every single angle remaining from here is from this exact same one. So I just, except for, of course, for this one, you need a little bit of a sharper angle for the bottom piece of that ramp. But all of the rest of them are that same angle on that miter saw. So I'm keeping that one in place until I get all of the cuts done. And then, that'll get everything exactly where I need it to be. So for here, we're just putting the ramp together, and just like before, we're doing pocket hole screws and glue. And I just used a couple of these different clamps here to get it in place. I'm trying to keep that nice and square as I'm doing it. And you can see here I'm putting my other 90-degree thingamabobbers there that I usually use when I'm making cabinets to keep that square as I'm putting the bottom part of the ramp together. So for here, we're just going to countersink and just put some regular screws into that, and that'll hold it nice and in place. And I was really careful with this. I took multiple measurements just to make sure that everything was exactly the length that we're looking for on each side, because of course we have to do this twice, one for each side of the ramp. And we're joining the top part the same exact way. We're just countersinking and putting a couple screws straight into it. And that's going to hold it nice and firm. So we get those two pieces together, and now we're going to put some supports in between the ramps. And if I was building again, I might put this one higher. I'm not 100% sold on it either way, to be honest. It creates a kind of a weird little spot on the inside that's a little visible. So it's extra trim to try to hide it well. And it's also an extra kind of little tripping thing for her little guy, Benny, but he really should be able to get over that without much of a problem. So we finish up getting our supports in place, and then we're going to flip it over and put everything on top of the bench and just screw everything straight into place. So first I clamped it so it wouldn't move on me, just put some good screws all the way through from that top platform to the ramp. And then after that's all nice and secured, I'm putting a few additional supports here in the middle of the ramp just so it can support a little bit of extra weight. I mean, Her guy is only 20 pounds, so this is probably a little bit of overkill for it, but turns out it actually came in handy later. And so I was mainly using scraps on here. So I'm going to put this ramp in just a couple pieces, but it won't matter because it's covered in carpet. And what I did for this top piece, I cut off a little bit of an angle, which is still the same angle that we were using with the miter saw earlier. And so those pieces of plywood will kind of match up really nice, and it'll be a good tight seam at the top. And for this part, what I'm doing here is I was going to do like the ramp and have that come up a little higher for the handrail, just like I did on the very top piece, but I realized it's going to be just too much of a hassle to do it that way. So I cut out these little extra pieces, and I'm just using some regular wood glue and just a little dot of CA glue there to hold it in place. And then after that, I'm going to flip it over and I'll put a couple screws in each one of those. And this is going to serve as the base for the handrail going up on the outer side of it. And we measured those out just to make sure that everything was nice and evenly spaced. And now we're going to be testing it out. And here you can see, like I mentioned, this is just going to be in a couple pieces for the platform instead of one continuous piece. And that's purely just because it fit on the scraps that I had for this particular project. The nice thing with this is because it's mainly just a frame that's going to be skinned, it's relatively light to move around, so it's going to be easy for my mom to move it from side to side when she needs to clean around it. And she was adamant that she didn't want any siding on the side of it that's going to be facing the bed. She only wants that on the side that's going to be facing away from the bed, and she wants the other one just to be a frame and open from there. So I put the outside part down on this piece of plywood. I can't remember if that was 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch, probably 1/4 inch. And then we just drew the lines of exactly where it needed to be. And then I cut just slightly outside of those lines because it makes it a little bit easier just to get it aligned properly when we're putting it on. And then we can come back with the flush trim bit on our trim router later to get it completely flush as needed. And for the majority of these cuts, I'm just using my track saw. You don't necessarily need a track saw for this. I just found it kind of the easiest thing. And cutting out the doorway here, you can only get so close with that without putting big gouges in it. So I got as close as I could, then just get my jigsaw and finish up those cuts. So we can see here I smeared down a whole bunch of glue, and then we're getting this into place and just using some brad nails to secure it. Now, a lot of these are going to be covered up by the trim, but the ones that aren't going to be covered by the trim will come back and just put some wood filler in there. And so for on the far edge of it, she wanted a small little kind of window for him as well. So that's what we're cutting out here. This is definitely not the most optimal way to do it, but it still works. So we're doing the same process, which is using the track saw and then finishing it up with the jigsaw. So while we're getting these pieces put in, I had a question for all of you guys. I'm actually kind of running low on projects that I need to do around the house. And that's what I've been trying to do, is do projects that are going to be useful for me or for some of my friends and family. But right now I'm kind of running low on stuff. So my idea was just to make something that I can do as a giveaway, just for fun. And, of course, I'm trying to make everything just completely free. But the one hitch I'm kind of running into is how I'm going to get things shipped to people. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for me to look into on how to ship a project like as a giveaway, something maybe the size of like a coffee table or a nightstand or something like that, please leave me some comments below so I can look into that later. And so since this part is going to be visible from the outside, I'm just kind of skinning all this with some of the scrap plywood just to kind of cover it up so it looks just nice and clean and more finished. And we'll leave the rest of the inner portion open to air. And this will create a little extra seams here, but that's not a problem since we're going to be putting trim on all of these edges. And the final piece itself is going to be painted as well. So for the trim on the top edges, I found this kind of corner trim over at our local box store, and I'm just cutting out kind of slightly angled recesses there, and that's going to go around the supports for the handrails above. So we cut out that for each one of the different sections, and then it kind of just slides right into place. And we did, of course, have the angle part on the top that is still the same angle that we've been using for everything else. So definitely, if you're doing a project like that, save that angle because you're going to use it quite a lot. And the reason why I use this particular trim is because I wanted to not only cover the sides, but a little bit of the top, and it gives a nice edge that's going to serve to hold in the edges of the carpet that my mom's going to end up placing on the tops. Otherwise, you'll see the edge of the carpet and it won't look quite as clean. So we're just using just little flat, thin pieces of trim that we're going to go around the door section and as well as the little window on the side. And for these, I'm just basically just cutting them out to size as I'm going and using some glue and brad nails to hold them in. And for this bottom trim, same process. The only other thing I would change if I was doing this part again, I would have cut it just short on the edge so I didn't have to put this little wedge piece. I think it would have been better if that wedge piece went all the way to the ground. It probably would have looked a little cleaner. You won't really notice it on this one because it's being painted, but it's just one of those small little details that I always kind of notice and bugs me later that I didn't do that the way I would prefer it. And from this angle, you can see what I was talking about earlier about those lower supports kind of being a little bit in the way. So if I would have raised up those up a little higher, it would have been less visible and less in the way. Then again, it probably doesn't matter for this particular one because to view it from this angle, you'd have to be standing outside of the wall to be able to see it since it's going to be really close to it. And the door is more on the lower end of the ramp, so it'll be pretty much hidden from sight. And next up, we're going to be putting up the handrail. So for the top portion, I just cut these to a 90 degree and we'll be joining those together. So I just kind of glue them and kind of clamped them down and threw in some brad nails to hold it. And after that, we're using this Forstner bit to drill down just enough so I can put in a screw into those top supports. And then I'll come back with a plug and fill those in later. To join the other section of it, we'll just be gluing the edge to the edge of this one, and that'll hold it well. And you can kind of see it lines up nice there since we used the same angle as before. So as we're in the home stretch here, you can see that it looks pretty darn solid, and it sits really well. It doesn't wobble when he runs out up and down it. And my mom told me a couple toddlers ran up and down it or as they were playing, and it didn't budge at all. So it held really well, even with that additional stress that I didn't actually plan for. And here are the final touches, putting in those plugs we mentioned before, and we'll come back with a pull saw to trim those off before we sand it down. And then after paint, you'll never even see that they're there. And that's the end of my part of the build. We've got it all nice and framed out and ready to go, and my mom wanted to put the carpet on and paint it herself. And I think it came out pretty well, although there's one detail that I swear my mom did just to mess with my OCD. She made those lines not completely straight, and she did it on purpose. And now I can't look away from that. So the final test, here comes Benny up the ramp, and that's it for this build. We'll see you guys in the next one.